That's interesting because a lot of people are probably thinking, hang on, so before the final HSC or before the trials, if you add up all the essays, there's 3 essays. So does that mean you memorize like 9 essays for those 3 sections?
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone, that's what you got to do to get 99. Hey everyone, it's Johnny from Jettle, and today I'm joined by a very special guest. I'm joined by Leila, who just completed her HSC and did incredibly well. 99.7 ATAR, 3rd in the state in English, 14th in the state in legal, so 2 state ranks. So someone who is very talented, very intelligent, and is kind enough to share her insights with us today. So Leila, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So you've only just received your results. We're doing this pretty soon after they came out. Describe how you felt on the day of the results and set the scene for us a little bit. Were you someone who was just waiting at the minute to get the results? Were they texted to you? Did you go online? Walk us through it.
No, I wasn't. I made sure that I stayed up late the night before so that I slept in. I set my alarm for 8. So I got up at 8, but they texted to mine came through at 5:40. So when I woke up, I saw those, and then I got my ATAR quite early. It was meant to come out at 9, but mine came out at 8:20. So I only had 20 minutes between when I got my results and when I saw my ATAR. And when I did see my ATAR, I refreshed the page again before I even told my mum, because I didn't think, I was like, nah, it can't be right. So I refreshed it again before I shared the news, because I was pretty shocked.
Wow. And were you expecting anywhere in the ballpark of that? Did you have a particular goal in mind?
No, I was never aiming for anything in 99s. I thought that was not really achievable at all. I thought the highest I could possibly get was in the 98s, but I was ready for a 97. So I was very surprised.
And what was your most unexpected result?
Probably legal. Internally, I was ranked 3rd. So I was not expecting a 98.
And that just goes to show as well that you don't need to be ranked 1st in the internal to get a state rank.
Yeah, it was that one really surprised me.
Yeah, well, obviously you did exceptionally well in that, and I'm sure your family was stoked as well.
Yeah, I'm very happy.
So just for everyone watching, how does it feel when you finish your exams? What was the feeling like when you finished that final exam, and what have you been doing since then?
It was so good. I had 2 exams on the last day, so I had 6 hours straight of exams. So I finished with a bang. So after that, I felt great. It was the best feeling ever, and getting to just relax with nothing. I felt such a weight lifted off me. I had no pressure, no expectations, living in limbo. You don't know what you're doing yet, and it's great.
Absolutely. And did it make it more worth it given how much effort you'd put into it? Was that on your mind when you were doing that kind of final chapter of study?
Yeah, definitely. I was I can't give up now. I've been working so hard for the last 2 years, basically, since year 11. So I was I can't be giving up now. So then when it was over, it was it was really good. It was I was doing 100%, so much work, and then I went to 0. So it was really nice.
So as you're studying in those weeks leading up to the final exams, you're just reminding yourself when things get hard, it's going to be over soon. I've been giving it 100%. I can't stop now. And that made it even more satisfying.
Well, yeah, just thinking back to me at the start of the year, by the end, I was very much done with it. I was I'm ready to just be done. But then I think back to me in March, and I'd be no, I can't let her down. I was so motivated and wanting to do well. So I was I have to work hard, because I put in the work all year.
Where do you think your motivation comes from? Is that an internal drive, or were there some external motivators?
No, I think it was internal. My family was not they were just happy I was trying hard and doing my best. They were not putting any pressure on me. I think it was definitely just me wanting to do well. I'm not really sure. I just wanted to do my best. So yeah.
And have you always been that way? You've put a lot of pressure on yourself to do well?
It definitely through from year 10, mostly year 11, it started. I put a lot of pressure on myself to do well, but it paid off in the end, so it was worth it.
Absolutely. And did you have any other particular goal in mind? You said you didn't have a goal ATAR, but were you doing all of this with the goal of then going on to something else at university or after school, or was it just for your own kind of personal gratification?
I think it was definitely just my own personal gratification. I didn't really have an ATAR that I wanted. I still am not 100% sure on what I'm going to do. I know what I'm going to do next year, but I'm not 100% sure where that's going to take me. I never had my heart set on a certain degree, but definitely English wise, my school has had lots of people who've done really well in English. So I felt I needed to live up to that.
Absolutely. And what are you doing next year? You said you've enrolled in something, or you're doing a gap year, or what's the plan there?
I was always set on going to Melbourne University, and I got in there. but I don't think, well, they haven't sent it out yet, but I got a scholarship there. But and I was going to go to college and do all that, but I don't think I'm going to do that anymore. I think I'll go to Sydney Uni and do a double degree in law and commerce.
Oh, awesome. And did you ever contemplate not going to uni in the first year? Was that popular among your friends in terms of gap years? What's the kind of general consensus at the moment in terms of your social group as to what they're doing?
No one in my social group is taking a gap year. Like my friends were all very like driven at school, and we're all ready for uni. Like I don't know anyone, I don't think, that's taking gap year. I think everyone's going straight into uni next year.
Okay. Yeah, it was a bit different when I did. I mean, more than half of my friends were having a year off, so
Yeah.
it's a different setup. But that obviously would vary group to group. I'm sure overall it's probably very similar. But let's wind the clock back to the start of year 12. Take us through your approach. You told us you'd already kind of cranked it up a notch in terms of your effort for a couple of years, so from year 10, 11. When you get to year 12, what's your approach in terms of how you're going to study for your exams, and how are you going to balance social life and study? Like, take us through a standard week in terms of getting home, when you study, how long you study for, etc.
It feels like so long ago to like reminisce on this, but I started studying like hard in year 11, and then I found the transition from year 11 to 12. Like I found that year 12 was so much harder than year 11, and like coping with my marks dropping a little bit in year 12 was definitely like a little bit of a hurdle there, but it was all right. So when I'd get home, I didn't study at the library. Like I was much more studying at home. I'd get home and start at like 4. A week before exams, I'd probably finish at like 11, and I'd have a break for dinner. Before school, I'd wake up early because my school had a library that opened at like 7:20. So I'd go to school and I'd start studying at 7:20, and school started at 8:20. So I'd do an hour before school, do classes, study periods sometimes, and then after school from like 4 to 11.
So you're staying 4 to 11, getting up presumably just after 6 or around 6.
No.
So you're not getting a lot
Like
of sleep.
6:20.
Yeah. You were only sleeping like 7 hours a night?
7, yeah. That was enough. Like
Yeah, I mean, I'm impressed by that. I mean, a lot of students need, maybe 9 hours or so, and that's kind of what they say. But obviously, it is subjective. Was that easy enough for you in terms of that kind of routine?
Yeah, waking up early to go to the library was definitely hard, especially in winter when it was like freezing cold, and I knew like everyone else was still asleep in their warm beds. But like by the end, it kind of like paid off. Like getting that hour before school, I reckon like I felt fulfilled before the day even started. Like it was good. I liked that hour before school where I did that. I think that really helped me a lot, because also your brain is so fresh in the morning. So I could do like tricky stuff really early, and then by the time I got home, I'd known I'd already done an hour of the hard stuff in the morning. So it was like, I liked that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the early win is a very strong psychological kind of tool to use. Just getting up. It's why people try to even just make the bed in the morning, right? You get that first win on the clock. Oh, it's not as hard as, going into school winter's day, doing an hour of study, and then doing a whole day of school and like 5-6 hours more study. But definitely there's a psychological component there that would be very advantageous. But that takes a lot of discipline, right? So did you ever waver from that? Was that your standard routine for most of year 12?
Yeah, I'd only do that the 2 weeks before exams. So when there weren't exams, I wouldn't wake up in the morning, but 2 weeks before, like from that date, I would do that every morning.
And 2 weeks was typically the time that you'd be notified of an assessment?
Yeah.
So you'd kind of like switch something on in your brain and be like, time to go super hard?
Yeah, basically.
And walk us through an example of English. So you've been given an English assessment. What's the process there? What are you trying to do first? And then what are you doing in the days before an exam?
So first, I definitely was someone who liked to have pre-prepared essays, obviously not sticking to those essays, but I know it doesn't work for everyone, but I definitely had like a stock essay, and then I had like a more difficult essay. I had like 3 for each module, and then additional quotes that I could slot in for different characters depending on the question. So I definitely started by writing essays, adapting them to different questions, saying like, if I got this question, which one would I use? How would I change it? What quotes would I slot in? What ones would I take out? Then after that, I'd get my teacher to look over those. I found feedback really important. Like I definitely benefited a lot from my teachers helping me, like giving me lots of feedback and then improving and keep going and like editing them nonstop. And then once I felt like they were at a stage where I could start learning them, I did. I didn't have them like fully memorized, but like I knew them. And I did a lot of short answer as well. I like feel like short answer practice, I did like so many papers of short answers. And I got a few of those like looked over by my teacher to see like where I was at. So definitely getting familiar with like, because short answers, obviously they're not predictable, but you know kind of what you're going to get in a way. Like when you do so many, you know what you're going to get. So like I felt like that was pretty beneficial for me, because I feel like a lot of people struggle with short answers because they think it's so unpredictable. But when you do so many papers from so many different schools, you know they end up kind of being the same. And then just a lot of practice. Like I read about my texts a lot. Like I read about them more than I like spent time just reading them. Like I read a lot of essays about them, a lot of like JSTOR essays. That really helped me, like getting perspectives from other people and then like making my own like that. I found that really good as well.
Yeah, the funny you say the JSTOR thing and reading up on what other people have said about the text that you're studying, because that is one of the most common things among the highest achievers in English. So for everyone listening, you should be taking note of that in particular. That's something I remember doing, and it always felt like a hack, right? You're looking into these kind of university level articles that have been written about what you're studying, and it allows you to kind of, borrow some of that material, use some of that material. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like I used to take little snippets. If I found nice vocabulary or phrases, I would try and work it into the response, because that gives your response flair, and now you don't just sound like a generic essay, you actually have something that has that nuance, and it also has that sophistication.
Yeah, I'd also get some quotes from those essays as well. And if I was quoting the actual text, the essays that I was reading, I would include them as critical quotes and like use the author and say them that way. But then, yeah, a lot of ideas I feel like I subconsciously like was taking on without even really registering and including that vocabulary subconsciously. Yeah, that's definitely something I'd recommend doing.
Absolutely. And that seems to be one of those things that can take someone from, say, a low band 6 to a high band 6. Because at the end of the day, what was your final exam result that achieved, third in the state?
99.
99, right. So amazing. Not sure, we'll have to speak to the person who got first, see if they got 100, but sometimes there's a few people on the same mark there, but 99, right. So you basically didn't lose a mark. Do you know by any chance where you lost the mark?
I have no idea. I haven't like looked at my paper or anything. I'm not sure.
I mean, there's probably not much point. You're just looking for the one mark. But see, there's a huge difference between the person who gets 90 or 89, 91, 92 and the person who gets 97, 98, 99. And I think a lot of it comes down to what you just said, is having those more sophisticated materials in there. And that comes from other resources, often from places like JSTOR, Google Scholar. Type in a keyword like context and then the name of the text, and then you can read what academics, professionals who do this for a living have actually said about it, and then you can incorporate some of that into your response, of course ensuring that it still has that authenticity and it still has that cohesion. You don't want to have an essay that's made up of all of these different chunks and it doesn't sound like a coherent argument. But there's a lot to be said there, I think, in terms of getting someone into the 95 plus range. Just want to clarify a couple of points there. So you would prepare a core draft. You said you'd had this kind of this main draft, but you also had up to 2 variations of it. Am I correct in saying they were variations, or they were completely different essays, or you were recycling materials across them?
Most, like, they were completely different essays, but then I would have quotes that I could put in each essay to make it like a different essay as well. But the 3 that I would have would be 3 complete different essays. So I'd have one like stock essay, and then I'd have 2 different ideas that were like more unique. But if the question was broad, I'd be using those unique ones. Whereas if it was like a very narrow question, then I'd be having to use the stock one.
And that's interesting, because a lot of people are probably thinking, hang on, so before the final HSC or before the trials, if you add up all the essays, there's 3 essays. So does that mean you memorize like 9 essays for those 3 sections?
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone, that's what you're going to do to get 99.
No, but I know a lot of people who did really well who didn't do that. Like, that's just what worked for me. A lot of people just like had plans that they knew as well, but definitely having like ideas for essays definitely would help.
Yeah, so you don't necessarily have to memorize 3 per module.
Yeah.
But would you recommend at least, did you memorize in full those essays?
Like I tried, but it was a lot because also Mod C, I had quite a few like discursives for that. I'd say I probably knew, like memorized, I probably had like 7. The last 2 I kind of just knew well. I tried to memorize as much as I could.
And did you end up in the final exam using the draft that you wanted to use or expected to use, or you found you genuinely did have to like pick a couple of ones that you weren't as familiar with?
In our exam, they were broad questions, like they weren't text specific. No, I found that they fit perfectly, like, because they were broad questions. I could have done whatever I wanted with them. So I used the texts that I wanted to, the essays that I wanted to use.
Okay, so preparing multiple drafts early was absolutely key for you, it sounds like.
Yeah.
When you prepare those drafts, it was important to do extra research, look at things like JSTOR and academic articles, incorporate that material in.
Yeah.
Then what it sounds like became the most important next step was getting feedback, particular from your teachers, and editing relentlessly, it sounds like. Edit. Did you just keep reading your work out loud, tweaking sentence by sentence? Was it that kind of hustle?
Yeah, I had them like pretty well edited because I started with some of these essays, like common module, I had them in term 1. So I was working, like, obviously I wasn't spending heaps of time on common module when we were doing the other modules, but I was like looking over it and like had it for like a few months. I had a lot of these essays that I was editing. So by the end, they were pretty well edited.
And did you time those essays to make sure you had time to spare to adapt to the questions?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that's really important because no matter how good your essay is, if it's like 2,000 words, it's not going to happen.
What was the time you were typically targeting, especially if you were dealing with just a draft essay that wasn't tailored to a new question? What were you kind of satisfied with in terms of having enough room on the day to be flexible?
Probably, it feels like so long ago. I don't even remember the exact time, but I think it was like 40 minutes for common module.
Yeah, well, I suppose you get allocated 45 for the short answers and the essay. And how many minutes would you say you wanted to have spare to do that adaptation?
Well, I had adapted them so many times to different questions that I kind of knew what I would do. Definitely doing a plan before. I feel like if you do the plan before, you don't need heaps of time to be doing that adapting when you're writing it out because you have it right there next to you, a plan of what exactly you're going to do. Like I'd write out each paragraph really quickly because we had no time, and then quickly just like the first word or first like 3 or 4 words of each quote that I was going to use, just so that like triggered it in my brain what quote it was. I wouldn't spend the whole time writing out every word of the quote. I just write like the key words that I needed to remember and slot in which ones. And then by the time I was writing it out, I had that plan that had already been adapted. Like I adapted the plan so the essay was really easy to write.
Okay, so you actually, on the day of your exams, wrote out a little plan before you started writing the actual essay?
Yeah, well, yeah, it was a very brief plan, like keywords of each quote, heading of each paragraph, that was about it. But yeah, I think that helped me a lot because I didn't forget any of it because I had it right next to me.
How many words on average do you think your essays were and then your craft of writing compositions as well?
1,300, I think, is where they're at.
Okay, so that's quite a lot of words in my view. So you were a relatively fast writer to be able to do that in that time. Is that right?
Well, I probably forgot some of I'm sure like some of the sentences and stuff were lost. So maybe it wasn't that much on the actual day, but I'm pretty sure that's how long my drafts were.
Okay, gives people some idea. But what I would say to people watching this, if you can't write 1,200 words in 40 minutes or 35, just do what you can definitely finish, which is why I always harp on about timing and just saying that the word count is subjective because you can write what you can in 35 minutes and that's it. You can try and get faster and faster at that, but there's no point trying to do 1,200 if you can actually only do 900 words or 800 words.
Yeah, definitely. It's better to have a shorter essay than to have a half-finished one.
And any other general tips for English in terms of, when students are approaching an exam, even if it's final exam or an assessment, what else kind of stands out or what feels like something you did routinely that really helped? Definitely
short answer practice. Like that was like I was doing that very consistently because I did not want to lose a mark there. Like I felt like it's common module. Like I really wanted to nail that. So looking over techniques, I didn't know, I didn't have a super massive glossary of techniques and I knew all of them. I didn't know that many techniques, but the ones I did know, I knew well so that I could quickly spot them out. Definitely a lot of short answer practice from other schools was also really important. Changing my essays to the questions, knowing what type of questions they're going to give me. You go in there, you don't know what you're going to get, but if you do so much practice, you kind of have an idea of the questions that they can ask you, what they can't ask you. You can semi-predict where it's going to go. Obviously, you're never going to know, but you have an idea, so it doesn't feel as daunting when you've done so much because you know what they can ask.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Just preparing as much as you can for the different question types and, as you say, practicing adapting an existing essay or a draft essay. Now, what a lot of people are probably wondering is when you got to that HSC period, how many weeks in advance did you start going full throttle and how many hours a day were you studying on average?
So I was studying a lot during like the end of school, but obviously that last week, not much is going to happen. So I was studying quite a bit before then there was the last week, not much. And then after that, I pretty much went straight into studying pretty hard. At like the peak of it, like probably like the most I ever did was probably like 12 or 13 hours. But yeah, that was probably the maximum because I didn't time myself, but I wanted to know how much I did each day because it made me feel like accomplished. Most of the time it was like 10 hours. That was like pretty much every day. Some days at the start it was a bit less, maybe like 8, but 10 was like probably the average.
And how did you structure that? If you're doing 10 hours in a day, how many subjects are you trying to cover in that day? And was there a particular order that suited you in terms of what you study first when you're freshest in the morning versus what you're doing last?
Yeah, so I generally started my day with a short answer, like timed paper, like just the short answers. Not every day, but every second day I would do that. I'd also start off with some maths, even though that was not my strong suit. I'd do that a bit in the morning because I'm not attempting that at night. And then I would leave till the end I wouldn't fit all my subjects in one day. Like that would be too much. I would break it up and do a few one day, a few the next day. I definitely would do like business at night because I felt like that was a little bit easier to be doing later at night. I would never try doing economics at 10 o'clock at night. Like that would just not end well. So yeah, doing subjects that are easier to do, I would do them later. And the ones that take a lot more energy, I'd be doing earlier. Taking breaks, I would go on walks and stuff like that. I could not work. In year 11, I wouldn't. Like I would sit there and be like doing what I needed to do, no breaks, no nothing. It worked, but like it was not worth it. Do you know what I mean? Whereas then by the end towards the HSC, like I knew I needed to be taking breaks. I'd go on walks. I'd go for like dessert with my friends. Like that definitely helped me, I feel. Like keep going. Like starting to integrate a bit more social life back into it towards the end because like you cannot work for like months and months. Like it was like 2 months of like heavy study. You can't really be doing that with no social aspects.
And how long in terms of those blocks were you studying at a time? Like, well, did you have a system there in terms of like hour on break or you did like a paper and then had a break? How long were the breaks?
I'd probably do, so depended how much I was trying to do that day. I would usually just have like 2 blocks and then a big break in the middle, maybe 3. So I would do like 3 or 4 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, like stuff like that, and have like 2 breaks in between there. I wasn't super strict on like I have to do this many hours, this many hours, this many hours, but I would try and have like 2 breaks a day.
Okay, that's good. And in terms of legal studies, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about that because people watching, I mean, you got a state rank in legal. What mark there equated to 14th in terms of your exam mark?
It was a 98.
98, right? Wow. So you have to get a 98 for your cohort to get 14th. So that's a high bar.
Yeah.
What just summarize kind of 3 or so key tips for preparing for that. What do you think, with English, like we covered, getting prepared early, getting that feedback, incorporating those articles. What's the equivalent for legal?
Legal, definitely knowing a lot of case study. Like it's case study, case study, case study. You can make any paragraph you want if you just have those case studies. And also I found it really helpful to have, because the syllabus, like the legal syllabus for each dot point, I'd have a paragraph. For some, I would avoid and not do it. But I made sure that like minimum, very minimum, I had 3 paragraphs, probably 4, for every like dot point. Like the investigation process, I'd make sure I had like 4, because you can be asked an essay on one specific like of those topics, and you want to make sure you have enough paragraphs in that to make an essay out of it. But you also want to make sure that you have enough variety and paragraphs from each one that you're able to like make an essay. If it's not specifying, you don't want to be having all 3 from one section. Like you need to be having from each different one so that you can show that you know it all. You know what I mean? So definitely having paragraphs that I knew. I didn't really memorize my paragraphs for legal. I found it easier I had paragraphs for each dot point, but I found it easier to just know the case study for each dot point, and then I can make my paragraph like on the day. It was because I had read the paragraphs enough that I knew what order and stuff like that.
And you did a lot of practice questions. Like how important were past papers for legal?
I found past papers, definitely. I did a lot of the HSC past papers for legal. Definitely for legal as well. That just reminded me, past papers, multiple choice, they're impossible. Like they're actually trick questions half the time. Like my teachers sometimes would be like, yeah, look, I don't know. Like some of them were just like really silly. So definitely doing as many of those as you can. Like there was a document on for my school's like shared drive, and it was like every question, multiple choice ever asked in the HSC, and then all the independent papers or whatever. Like it was like all like my school's past papers, multiple choice, and it was huge. And I made sure to do like every single one of those multiple choice, so that even though I knew they were going to ask me silly little trick questions, I knew that I could get the rest of the questions.
Awesome. And before we wrap up, do you have any other general tips in terms of how to approach year 12 in general? Like how to think about it? What advice would you give to someone just going into year 12 now, or maybe a student who's even a little bit younger than that?
Probably lowering your expectations a little bit on like your marks wise, because going from year 11, it's so much easier to know all of the content. Well, I felt like obviously it's really hard to know all of the content, but it's much more manageable. There's not as much. So then going from year 11 where you think, oh, this is like great, to then year 12, knowing that your marks are going to drop a bit. Like my teachers would drill that into us, like your marks are going to drop. Like that's the point of going into year 12. We're testing you. So your marks are going to drop just a little bit. And that's like, okay, like it doesn't mean that your ATAR is actually going to go down. It's like managing the expectations and knowing that you're not ever going to be able to know absolutely everything. Like I felt like when I didn't know everything, I'd be like, oh my God, like how am I going to do this? But like, you're not going to know everything. Like I feel like no one knows everything. So just understanding that and accepting that you're going to know as much as you can. Yeah. Just doing a lot of practice, a lot of past papers, like they're great, and marking them. If you don't mark it, there's no point in doing it.
Well, that's fantastic, Leila, and I really want to thank you for your generous insights here. I think the tips that you've given are spot on, super practical, but what's very clear is that you have an incredible work ethic. And, you know, even for people watching, if you think, oh, look, I can't do that many hours a day, just do the best you can, because obviously everyone has their limit, but push yourself so that you can get that sense of satisfaction at the end of the day. So Leila, thank you so much for coming on, and again, very generous of you to share that with everyone. I'm sure people are going to appreciate this. So thank you very much. And for everyone watching, if you enjoyed, make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and we'll see you in the next one.